It is my absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage Tom Delmont. Many will know him for his years at Mountain Goat or then Fixation, but he's always been a punk rocker, and like all punk rockers, he's always cared about the world around him. So he's here to talk about breweries who want to start their sustainability journey.
He's on. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Will. Thank you to the few people I've managed to wrangle away from the bar. I appreciate it, gang. Timmy and the gang. You'll be back? Okay, I'll hold you to that. Now, I was going to quickly, add a quick little spiel. Covering off a lot about sustainability. I did this talk recently, guys, at the High Country Hop Symposium, or a similar talk. So if you did see that talk, there'll be some similar content, so my apologies. Quickly, just wanted to say the Bintani team, guys, now we've all had a few beers. Can we give it up for Dale, Phil, Pete and the whole gang from Bintani? Bloody legends. Thank you, guys. I know everyone said it, but no, really their passionate support for the industry. I've been a small part of the industry for almost 20 years now, and they've been a fixture far longer than that. So just a passionate team of legends and professionals, great products, and always supported the game. Probably a little bit about my background as well, and how I ended up learning about sustainability and manufacturing and brewing in particular. I was the first sales rep at Mountain Goat and worked there for 8 years, happily building the brand and the business, and obviously Asahi bought the business, and that was in 2015, and then I started another brand with the Fermentum Stone and Wood team called Fixation Brewing. We did that for 8 years. Sam, who's one of the technical sales specialists at Bintani, worked with me there for a long time as our brewer, and that business was then acquired by a larger brewer, Lion, and then I had a little break from talking about beer for 7 months, and then I realised I've got 3 kids that need shoes and shit, so I better get another job. And I've also been selling the Severo software product that I'll talk about a little bit today as a small part of the sustainability question. But I've recently taken a job with Hop Nation as well, working with the guys in a commercial role in sales and marketing. So it's great to be back in the game full-time as well in 2 different hats. Going through the fundamentals, this is a little bit about today's chat. The fundamentals of sustainability and why it's important and why it's something that we should be having a think about in our industry. Some of the businesses that are in the room do a great job of talking about it and acting on it, and then others, still in that sort of starting the journey or on the early stages of it, and then others it's like not important and it's not a part of the brand or it's not a part of the values, but chances are it's probably worth thinking about. Second up, we'll talk about how breweries can head towards decarbonisation or being essentially a neutral emitter for greenhouse gases. And then Bintani, a little bit of a touch on Bintani because the guys have been measuring their impact across the board and all of the products that they distribute and their business and their facilities. And then a little bit of a looking forward and Q&A. So why is it important? And I can see there's a few brands in the room that are already on board, but I mean, this is the slide that is worth referencing. And if there's no policies or there's nothing that we adopt, we're going to look at a 4.1 to 4.8 degree planetary temperature increase over the next, what is it, 30 to 20, well, from now, if we go from 2030 almost to 2100, and then current policies, if we can make that all happen, 2.5 to 2.9 degrees. With the current pledges and targets in place, it's still going to be a 2.1 degree increase. And if we can somehow head towards some of the pathways that we're adopting through either SBTI targets, then we will be able to reduce that further. Some of the major impacts that we've seen in Australia recently, and of course the pandemic wasn't a help, but these supply chain disruptions, weather events. I haven't met any barley farmer or hop grower, and we heard Dean talk earlier about how they are looking after their farm and their practices, but every single farmer I know wants to minimise these major disruptions. So these are some of the challenges that brewers face. So the waste, the energy use and emissions, the water use and scarcity across the board, and supply chain issues, which I just touched on, changing consumer demands and that next generation that are coming through that are learning about this in their daily, school, university. They're hearing more and more about it, and they're starting to look for brands that are acting in this space, and then and also what that means for industrial agriculture as well. One thing I guess about staff, and I guess good beer, I call it good beer because we're all in the good beer landscape, whether you're working with Lion or Asahi or you're working with, a tiny brewery with 2 people, in the brewery itself. Good beer cares about the planet, and the consumers also generally care about what they're buying and the brands they're supporting, especially at the pointy end and the good beer, the pointy end of the good beer world. We can all say price is a factor, and price is an issue for some consumers, but a lot of people are still happy to pay $24 to $28 for a 4-pack of really bloody good beer, providing that brand or that product resonates with them as a consumer. A couple of the other things that talking about sustainability does for your business is the staff attraction and retention value, and this is probably the major one I've seen in Mountain Goat and Stone & Wood Fermentum, is that the impact it can have on your team within your business is pretty significant. You've got a younger workforce. They're caring about the businesses they work for and the companies they choose to represent, whether they be in production, packaging, on the road, selling the beer, whatever it might be. They choose to work for businesses that are giving a shit about this stuff. And then the consumer side, that's becoming increasingly important, especially if we're going to attract the next generation of good beer drinkers, which we need to. We can't all be 46-year-old healthy-looking guys like me that have hung around in pubs forever. We actually need to get the next generation, into good beer as well and off of hard fucking solo eventually. Brand authentic, not that it's a bad thing. It's just, maybe we got to get a few of them off it. Brand authenticity. So, walking the walk and talking the talk, backing it up. So, if you're going to make claims, if you're going to talk about this stuff, you definitely want to make sure it's part of the brand story. And we heard that a little bit with the marketing talk before as well, which was fantastic. And then also just reducing your company risk across the board. So future-proofing your supply, your inputs, and your business on a broader sense as well. Quick intro to how it works. What is carbon accounting and how does this matter and how does this apply to the sustainability side? Effectively, all businesses have a carbon footprint, and it is made up of everything that the business does, whether it be ordering labels, ordering printed cans or blank cans, whether it be buying in chemicals for the bar, whether it be transporting your own beer to the 3PL or sending your reps out on the road. And effectively, a business's carbon footprint can be boiled down to the business activity multiplied by an emission factor. So this business activity, as it says, all of the company actions multiplied by an emission factor that is a value that's a globally recognised. There are certain databases, they are updated annually, and that's a value that measures how much CO2 equivalent from the other 6 greenhouse gases are emitted for each business activity. That's just another way to look at it, the same equation, but for instance, 10 kilos of organic barley malt multiplied by the emission factor for the standard barley malt. Now, there obviously now are some lower impact malt available and lower carbon footprint malt, and that is where Bintani and the team come in as well with some of their products, which I want, and some of the other products they represent as well, and then that helps you convert to a CO2 equivalent of 5.7 kilos in that situation. This is just a little bit of the technical terminology that you use in this space. Now, I don't know, we always have a few funny slides with this. I don't know, it's the format the guys work with in the UK, but essentially I might go to that one because it's the same. This is the same, scope 1, 2 and 3, scope 1, 2 and 3. The way to think about this is the only kind of boring bit, but scope 1 is fuels that are burnt in-house or in company vehicles. So company facilities, so forklift gas, driving a car with the rep in it, delivering through your own vehicles, that kind of thing. Scope 2, purchased electricity, steam, heating, cooling, anything that needs to be burnt off-site but help run the facility. The LEDs burning, the air conditioning in the office, that kind of thing. And then Scope 3, which is the really hard one to quantify, is everything upstream, so all the inputs and all the ingredients. So Bintani track all of their ingredients and their carbon footprint. So all of the ingredients that you'll be buying from Bintani and the malt, hops, hop extracts, fruit flavours, yeast, everything, through to the downstream, end of life, all the way through to the end of use, end of life of the product. So think about it, transporting an empty keg or a keg star to the brewery, filling that with the beer that you've brewed 2 weeks ago, shipping that out to the 3PL and ultimately getting that to the venue and getting that back into the system, or in the case of bottles or cans, the percentage that would end up in recycling at the end as well. So Scope 3 is a really hard one to quantify, and it's a pretty technical part of the process. So this is just a good idea to just think about when you hear Scope 1, 2 and 3. That's a total company's footprint. Where does a brewery's emissions regularly come from? So about 30% from ingredients, so all those inputs I mentioned, about 30% from packaging, and about 15% from company facilities running those, and 12%, so surprisingly, a lot of people think transport's one of the big ones, but about 12% in transport. And you can see the biggest source of emissions, conventional barley. So like I said, not the low footprint or low impact barley that some of our partners are starting to produce, but conventionally grown barley would probably be one of the biggest source of emissions for a brewery and its products, packaging, and then natural gas. I was talking with someone earlier about natural gas and just how much of a challenge it is, given you need to have gas in a lot of facilities, and there's no alternative, but you're going to be hamstrung by price and gradually phasing that out of the system. And if you look at what happened with the federal election recently, this is going to continue moving in this direction, whether we like it or not, depending on what's the side you sit on. So it's certainly something worth thinking about for the long term, and we saw that with the energy chat as well before. I guess this is an example of how measuring a footprint for your brewery is quite unique. This is the Bristol Beer Factory Impact Report, and they're an example where they sell most of their beer in their town of Bristol, and most of it's in draft. So you can see there where we had 30% ingredients, 30% packaging, because they're a much lower use of packaging and much higher draft distribution, hyper-local, it's actually almost 53% ingredients, much lower in the case of distribution, much lower in the case of packaging, 11%, 8% distribution, so much lower. So it is unique depending on your business and your model and how it works. And there are some people with brew pubs, so it's a totally different model again. What does taking action look like in the beer space, and how does it resonate? I guess, you can start really small. So Mountain Goat, when I started there in 2007, had a ride to work scheme, which I mentioned the last chat, and it was $2 or $3 a day. And every day that you rode your bike or you didn't drive your vehicle to the brewery, you got a little rebate, which was encouraging people to skateboard, ride their bike, get on the tram, but avoid using their vehicle. That is just one small example of taking that step to trying to reduce employees' impact on their commute. All the way through to, I've worked for a B Corp, certified B Corp, that has a full-time sustainability officer in a staff of, well, it was probably at the time 60 or 70 people. So there's very different levels of commitment, but I think taking action can look like a whole range of things. So let's go into it. For the operations side, Water and energy efficiency. I don't know any brewer that doesn't try and minimise their water or energy use. That's sort of across the board, but there's always little improvements that people are making. I know Tim and the guys at Hop Nation do quite a lot with brew house efficiency, minimising waste, harvesting heat, and reusing water within the production side as well to minimise their impact. So that's a great example there. And they've made numerous little improvements over the years to their production facility to do that. Renewables, obviously a part of it. We had the energy chat before. That can be a pretty big impact as well to the carbon footprint. Waste management, so making sure you're separating the waste streams, recycling practices, how you're adhering to those within the packaging side and the production side. And then, as I mentioned, the brew house efficiencies. The other side is supply chain, and this is where you can have a pretty big impact as well. And I think it's probably come from brewers in a lot of cases. I know Mel's there, having a conversation with some of their major suppliers to have an impact on what they're supplying to their brewery. That might mean working with a supplier over the long term to look at bringing in a low footprint malt alternative. Or in the case of, I know the guys with Voyager, they used at Fermentum a small percentage of the regen grain in every brew. Now that was getting towards 20 million litres a year, so even a small percentage of regen grain has a big signal to the growers that then supply Voyager through that supply chain. Yeah, and like it or not, it's obviously a big brewery, but it's starting to have an impact at the supply side, which opens up the market, reduces the price for that product over time as well. So the ingredients, so low carbon malt and hops. Packaging, looking at how you can make the most of your keg fleet if it's owned or leased, keeping it super local, really nailing the backyard as well where possible. That's obviously depends on the business model, but most brewers try to own the backyard where they can, and it was certainly a strategy with my 2 roles with the businesses I've mentioned in the past to be as strong as possible within Stone and Wood was 300 k's of the brewery, either direction, and Mountain Goat was always Melbourne focused first and foremost as well. Transport, so where possible, looking at EVs, which is starting to come in more and more, and even I see Mick from LickX, they're starting to explore that side of things for their trucks as well, where it makes sense, and rail over road where possible as well. I know there's some WA crew here as well. They're starting to look into those kind of options, and even Lion does that quite a bit where it makes sense. And then, engaging with the suppliers is something that people are starting to do as well, and just having those conversations at this early stage, and it starts to plant the seed and makes it easier for everyone in the long run. This is an example of how kegs are so much different to glass or even aluminium. We've got the 440ml can, 330ml can, and the stainless steel keg. It's not a 330ml keg, that's a 50-litre keg. And then the 330ml glass bottle as well. So an 85% difference between a 330ml standard craft bottle to a keg, a 50-litre keg that's ultimately used time and time again. So massive impact there when you can prioritise draft where possible. Having a chat to the supplier, as I've mentioned, emissions for every schooner. This is looking at the barley emissions. There's a massive opportunity for reductions here, and this is starting to happen anyway. But if you visited Whitton and seen Stu and what he's doing out there with some of his local farmers, it's definitely worth going up and having a look and having a chat to see what they're doing on farm, and the biomass that they're increasing on the soil. There's some of them doing it entirely without fertiliser additions, minimising water usage. It's having a massive impact at the early stages there. I guess the other thing to mention is you can't do it all at once. So you do have to look at what you can do, what you have control over, your own operations, high-level control. You can save money, but sometimes it costs a shitload to do it. So changing equipment, making brewhouse modifications, those kind of things, or going to renewables. I mean, one of my clients was looking at renewables, but it was going to cost 20 grand extra a year. So it wasn't something they were able to do at that stage, but it was on the horizon. Then the next stage is what suppliers you can influence and have a conversation with. And I know Bintani are already forward thinking in that regard, and they're already using products and working with their suppliers to produce this. But if you spend quite a bit with certain suppliers, you can have some level of influence, can make some changes, and certainly have an option. And then the other side is like the Vizzies in America, the Ball Corporation, the massive companies where that's going to be a slow burn, right? You cannot influence Vizzy that heavily when you buy a pallet of cans every month, but it's about starting to take a group, an industry approach to it, and that's where it's taking pressure from across the board, from the whole game. And yes, it will take some of the bigger players to also move that dial, but that's we've seen that with some of the cans already. It's starting to incorporate a percentage of recycled aluminium within Australia. So how we're helping Bintani to head towards net zero: data management. So this is just now a bit about the platform. It plugs into internal systems, so whether you're using Unleashed, SAP, NetSuite. By moving away from Excel, Bintani can manage and track all their emissions in a totally structured way and automate it in real time, so have it each month. You'll have that Scope 3 visibility that I've touched on as well, and you'll have that built-in, industry specialist expertise. The guys at Zaviro now have worked with about 50 breweries. Some of them ended up moving their production facilities, so they've even, one example was a contract brand, so a pretty big contract brand, and they moved production facilities to their main market once they had that extra layer of data of the carbon footprint of making the product at a slightly cheaper contract facility 2 hours north, or moving it to a contract facility close to their main market. And that was Jubal in the UK. Some of the brands that the team are already working with, that we're working with as well. I've got to call out Bodrigi, Hop Nation and Bintani are already on board. But if you look at some of these rockstar brands in the UK, Daya is absolutely cranking in London. Their main beer is called Steady Rollin' Man Pale Ale, and they put a product carbon footprint on the back of every can, and it has their CO2 emissions equivalent per litre of beer for every beer, which is different depending on the beer itself. So that has its own product spec, which is talking direct to the consumer. That's the only brand I've seen going that far that's going talk direct to consumer on the packaging itself. But it won't only a matter of time before someone does that in the beverage space in Australia. Obviously, there's some major hop growing co-ops. Gypsy Hill, which is a massive brand over there as well, and even Heineken-owned Brixton Brewery is on board. So there's quite a mix of brands from small to pretty big. This is the company that I just mentioned. This is a company that is publicly putting out their targets and making a commitment to their consumers, to their major customers, and to their fan base. So they're looking at 100% renewable. They've done that. They've cut emissions by 20% already. They're looking at 15% reduction in packaging-related emissions, and they've got the product labelling that I've touched on. Jubal, they've become a real leader over there as well. They're Cut with Peaches is their main beer. It's like a peach pale, and that is a company that's tracking everything and going transparently. And it was just to quote their head of operations, the visibility we now have over our carbon data is the most valuable thing for us, because it enables them to identify key areas for carbon reduction projects and help lower the footprint. So this will highlight the low-hanging fruit, but then also what you can do over time to have some major impacts. And then obviously it's a competitor, but a different hop growing company in Yakima Chief Hops, and these guys work with Zaviro in the US for their hop growing co-op there in the large family farms in the US. So why are smart breweries starting to invest in this area? And there's no secret, some of the smart ones are already doing it, but there's a reason why Lion Kieran end up looking at Stone and Wood and saying, God, that's a business and a brand we can't create, and it's worth acquiring at a huge multiple, massive price tag. But It's operational efficiencies and cost savings across the board. So this was a company that's already reducing waste, moving all the little things add up across the board. But the spent grain, the renewables, the water efficiencies, the trade waste, all of those kind of things. They have a stronger supply chain influence across the board. So that's working, suppliers as partners. That was always one of our key values within the business as well, and we have supplier team days, and make sure they were a huge part of the business from day one as the business grew. And the hop growers as well were a massive part of that. Competitive advantage and market access. So, you're seeing B Corp certification and sustainability credit attract customers, but also investors where, investment's required. We've also seen some companies secure government tenders and government grants and government contracts as a result of leading the way in this area as well. And then lastly, trust and data transparency. So being able to show verified data, backed with CDP, backed with greenhouse gas protocols, all the European and UK rules that apply are adopted because they're kind of a little bit more advanced than some of the rules here, and there's certainly been some question marks raised around some of the projects that were run by the Australian government at the moment. So it's sort of like you're going to a higher level of verification with the UK standards and the EU standards. And then the other part is the stronger relationships with investors, retailers and customers. Like that is certainly a big one. If you're talking to a big procurement team or you're trying to launch a new product with a bottle shop group or one of the larger retailers or potentially a pub group, and you can say to them, this is what we're doing in this space and this is what we're investing in, this is why it's important to us, and this is the carbon footprint for our brand per litre, that will certainly resonate. Just before I wind up, I'm sure can have a chat as well at the bar, and it's pretty hard. I should have said hard time. 6 beers in, everyone's had a few little samples. I don't know if everyone's had that abstract terpene beer, but far out, that's pretty wild. But I should just lastly, before I finish up, if you can scan that, I'll leave it up there for a while, but you just get a free guide on how to start taking steps within your business. And what that will help you do is go, okay, do we want to make this a priority within our business, within our brand? Do we want to start to establish a green team? Do we want to let some people within the business that are passionate? It's got to be someone from production or someone from the brewery or packaging side. There's got to be someone from probably sales and marketing, and there's probably got to be someone from the office or the finance side as well. And if you can bring that team together, then they will help to lead that within your business. And if it's a much smaller brand, then it could be just something that's led from the start by the founder or co-founders. But that will help give you a guide on how to take those steps and start to build that green team, set targets. Built into what we do is trying to set 2030 and 2050 targets. So if we are going to hit this, we're going to have to do it together. That's about it from my side. I think I'll hand over back to Willie. No curly questions.
Thanks, Tommy.